So, hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are and wherever you're calling in from. My name is Seth Collins. I'm the Director of Learning at Terra.do. This is the third of our three-part series in partnership with the Solutions Journalism Network, talking about global climate solutions. For those of you who are new to Terra, I'll just do a quick introduction. Terra is an online learning platform. Our goal is to help accelerate the skills shift towards working on climate and sustainability. We do that through educational programs as well as sort of free learning experiences like this. And so we're really, really excited and really grateful to have you all joining us, and are really looking forward to the session. We've had two really excellent sessions so far on nature-based solutions and indigenous climate solutions. And this is I think this is going to be a great final of the three webinar series that we've been putting on. I'll pass over to Angela to introduce SJN very briefly, and then we will get into our wonderful conversation.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Evans. I am the Climate Network Manager here at the Solutions Journalism Network, where we promote rigorous evidence-based reporting on solutions to social problems. One of our key areas is climate change and addressing the climate crisis through our reporting. And specifically, we believe that solutions journalism is a powerful tool to help shift the narrative surrounding climate change coverage from one of despair to one of optimism, where stories of successful climate responses inspire positive change, collaborations, and a sense of collective empowerment and resilience. With that, I will hand it to Hugo Balta, our moderator for today's event. Hugo is a great friend of SJN. He is the publisher of the Latino News Network and the Director of Solutions Journalism and DEI Initiatives at the Fulcrum. He's also an accredited solutions journalism trainer. And I will pass it on to you now, Hugo.
Thank you, Angela, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you and be your moderator. We have a wonderful group of special guests that will help us unwrap today's topic. I'm going to briefly introduce each one, and then they're going to help us learn a little bit more about the work that they do. I'm going to start with Anu Jogish. She is a doctoral researcher at the London School of Economics and the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. Her research sits at the intersection of climate-related financial risks, community vulnerability, and climate adaptation in India. Anu, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, everyone. So as Hugo said, I'm Anu, and it's actually fantastic to be part of this panel today. So I've actually been working in the climate space as a reporter, as a researcher, but also a practitioner delivering technical assistance, specifically on policy and governance mechanisms on climate adaptation for a good decade and a half now. So my time at LSE is really actually as a doctoral researcher is sort of going back to the field, both literally and metaphorically, because we've had about a decade and a half, or rather 2 decades of specifically adaptation, climate adaptation action globally. And a lot of my work, we've sort of realized that we're not hitting the mark. And so my work now goes back to the ground. I work with financial institutions transnationally, but also look at community vulnerability, both climate and financial precarity in India, and understand how we need to reframe climate solutions, think about impacts, think about indigeneity, think about intersectionality as well. So yeah, it's exciting times. But very quickly to add, I am very much in the field. I'm in small town India, in one of the smallest, or rather one of the most populous states in the country, in Uttar Pradesh. So I apologize if my internet goes up and down. And I also apologize for all of the truck noise you'll see in the background when I'm speaking, but I try and keep myself muted when I'm not speaking. So yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
Thank you, Anu. Now let's learn a little bit more about Gargi Sharma, the Communications and Development Manager at the Klima Fund, CLIMA Fund, who's also joining us. A human rights activist, advocate, and lawyer, Gargi is involved in the feminist and environmental movements. She is committed to decolonizing the social justice movement and believes in mobilizing people's power to create lasting social change. Gargi, let's learn more about you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Garki. My pronouns are she and her. I am joining you from Haarlem in the Netherlands. I work for the Klima Fund. I've been here since late 2019, and I work in both communications and the development part of the work. What my organization does and my communications work that attaches to it would be the learnings that I'll be deriving from here today. So the Klima Fund is a collaboration among 4 public foundations, all based in the US, that came together about 7-8 years ago to move money to the front lines of the climate crisis. So we move money to movement groups that are working at the intersection of climate mitigation and human rights. We especially focus on moving money to groups that are led by women, youth, indigenous peoples, and peasant farmers, because we understand that those who are the closest to the problem are the ones who are the best equipped to solve it. And yeah, we fund in 168 countries, largely in the so-called global south or the global majority, depending on which perspective you choose. I'm very happy and very excited to be a part of this conversation today, and I'm curious to see how it goes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gargi. And last but not least, Tarun Jaime is the founder of Green Jams, an award-winning clean tech enterprise creating carbon-negative building materials out of crop residues and industrial byproducts to solve the climate change caused by construction and crop residue burning that is burning. Tarun, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hey, thanks so much for that introduction. I founded Green Jams primarily, again, to remove 10% of global CO2 emissions. And I feel like the best way that we can make this happen is by fixing the materials with which we make our buildings. I founded the company, but I also, literally take care of every function here. I invented the product. I'm also responsible for operations, business development, sales, finance, and so on. I am a civil engineer. I have a master's in environmental forensics and a PhD in civil engineering. I essentially worked in the space of bioconcrete during my as part of my PhD. And I think there's this one little thing that's interesting about all of my degrees is that they are a consequence of me wanting to build this company. So started the company first and then earned all the degrees along the way to equip myself with the skills to make the difference that I set out to achieve.
And as our other guests have told us, and I forgot to mention as well, where are you located?
Oh, I am in Bangalore, India right now. It's 10:39 p.m.
Great. I live in Chicago in the United States, but I'm currently in Medellin, Colombia. And I'm really excited about this conversation because one of the things that we talk about in solutions journalism is that the responses to the societal problems might be right in front of you, figuratively and sometimes literally across the street or across the country and across the globe. So I'm here in Medellin, Colombia, to really learn about urban development and trying to find that equilibrium between a country that is continuing to develop, as well as a country that is very much looking to preserve its natural resources. So time is short. Let's get right to it. And I'd like to begin with you, Tarun. This question is at the core of today's conversation. We'll begin with you, and then we'll hear from Gargi and Anu. Let's talk about your work that focuses on the co-benefits of climate action.
Oh, so introducing this product to the market has, I think, been the biggest challenge that I ever had to overcome. And I don't think it would have been possible if I did not focus on the co-benefits of the solution. So the one thing that we essentially help achieve help our customers achieve is up to 50% lower construction cost and 3.5 times higher thermal insulation, while also increasing speed of construction, and therefore, as a direct consequence of rapid construction, your cost also comes down. So, but beyond all of these things, some customers that we speak to also care a lot about the social impacts of our solution. So we address crop residue burning, and consequently air pollution and carbon capture and so on. So, but for us, what was tangible or at least the co-benefits that essentially led to more sales were around the aspects of thermal insulation and lower construction cost. And I think at least for this particular market, that's what works best. I still haven't explored other international markets, so I cannot definitively answer if the other co-benefits would make it a better sell.
Thank you. And Gargi, same question to you. Talk to us about your work and where it intersects with co-benefits.
I would say our entire work is co-benefits. Our Klima Fund was founded because of the idea that the climate crisis is not a crisis of carbon, but it's a crisis of the climate injustices that are faced by communities and individuals all over the world. So we resource groups that are addressing the root causes of the climate crisis. So basically capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, and heteropatriarchy. And when you're addressing those root causes, it means that you're addressing all of the injustices that go with it. Our partners are able to respond to the emerging political needs in the short term. So, for example, during the early stages of the COVID crisis, but at the same time, also advance long-term political needs like moving away from extractive energy systems and towards regenerative ones.
Thank you, Gargi. And I think I want to, Anu, before I go to you with the same question, we have a question from one of our guests, and please forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Suzanne Plout. And it's in line with what we're talking about. I think, Gargi, you started to unfold that, and the same thing with Tarun. But the question is, can we talk about defining what the co-benefits are? So Anu, if you could start with answering that question and then weaving in how your work intersects with co-benefits, I think that would be beneficial. Thank you for the question, Suzanne.
Absolutely. So co-benefits in the climate conversation or in any sort of policy conversation started off very much to try and pull in the idea of win-win, to try and sort of make a case for resources, finance, policies, and design as a way to also sort of maximize benefits across multiple objectives. So in the climate space, actually, if you look at it historically, you always had economists looking at policy spillovers, right? So they looked at both positive and negative spillovers and looked at, therefore, benefits, synergies, and trade-offs. Now, in the policy space historically, it started off with thinking about mitigation action and asking for finance for mitigation action by sort of couching it under energy security, energy savings with energy efficiency, and so on. And of course, then it expanded from that. And my work focuses a lot on adaptation. And so if I looked at it from my past work as a practitioner, when we looked at governments, it was when we worked with ministries and departments in the global south, both at the national and subnational level, it was very obvious from the beginning that these are departments that have finite resources, but also tied to very specific sectoral objectives that are departmental or tied to a political cycle, whether it's green jobs, better connectivity, public health. So you're coming in with some resources and ideas for a climate plan, and you want to mainstream climate change in existing sectoral policies. So a lot of my work, co-benefits, was actually inevitable. We had to create that conversation so we would find a door opener for having climate conversations in existing policies. But if I was to go down a little more micro in terms of the work I'm doing now, I'm now having to unlearn some of this and see that we need to reframe how we think about co-benefits. And this is something that not just my work, but you'll see a lot of emerging research on. When you go to local communities, indigenous populations, climate change is not the first thing that comes to their mind. It's not the first thing, even in perennially climate affected places. Often it's jobs, it's livelihood security, it's better income, access to markets. And I'm certainly seeing this in the space that I am I'm in a very flood prone part of the country, but actually that's not the first thing that comes to mind. So how am I framing the climate conversation when that's not the first thing? Very quickly, as an anecdote, I was part of this very interesting conference just very recently for urban informal workers in South Asia. And the organizers got very frustrated very quickly because their solutions were cool roofs, vending machine, sort of vending carts at higher levels for inundation. But that's not what a lot of the gig economy workers, informal workers were asking. They were asking for pensions. They were asking for rights to water infrastructure in areas where only upper castes had captured it. So they weren't asking for climate change. They were not asking. And so it's really thinking about reframing what the co-benefit conversation is and whether we need to frame it from the perspective of the communities that will get impacted and from their needs first.
Yeah, I think reframing is so important, especially when we're talking about climate change and climate action. And that's the next question. And Gargi, I'd like to start with you. How can messaging about the co-benefits accelerate climate action?
Thank you. So my work's focus is very much speaking to the audience of wealthy individuals, large funders, and so forth to move money to those who are advancing solutions to the climate crisis. And one of the first things that comes to mind is really reframing what the role of each person is. And, I live in a Western industrialized country. I don't know what it's like being in South Africa, where there is no electricity in certain spaces and life is so limited, right? It can't be my job to decide how to spend that money, right? And so what we're basically trying to do is give money to the local community who say, okay, we are going to set up solar panels so we're able to have electricity, which means we can have a fridge and some space to cook, which means that when children come for the crash or daycare, they have food to eat today and they'll have food to eat tomorrow as well, right? If I was going in as an outsider thinking, these people haven't gone to college like I have gone, right? What do they know about whatever solutions and so forth? Solution might just be like what you hear at Davos all the time. Yeah, let's dig wells in Africa and do, something for like vague African girls. But if you're listening to the communities who are leading these lives, who are on the front lines of the climate crisis, you will understand that the solutions are so much more holistic and so much more broad and go beyond what one could what one who is very far away from the scenario could imagine or dream. So I think talking about messaging, the first messaging that I would like to think of is that we should really move away from this idea that certain kinds of people or categories of people are only the victims of the climate crisis and they cannot be climate experts. And I think doing so really robs us of the opportunity of having the wisdom and the learnings of everyone really play a role in their future. So I think that is the first messaging point I would think of. Another messaging point I would think of is who is best equipped to spend money. And again, I know I stay in philanthropy all the time, so I speak from a philanthropic perspective, but we can see like Silicon Valley is like ready to blow like tens, hundreds of millions on some startup that's planned to lose money for the first 10 years. And they're like, yeah, that's totally fine, whatever you're doing. But when the same money holders turn comes to giving money to those who are ensuring that we have a future and clean air and forests exist and communities exist and so forth. There it's like, we will give you a grant of, I don't know, 20,000 for 1 year. And at the end of it, you have to tell us where every single cent went, because we assume that you don't know how to spend money, or you are situated in such a geography where our assumption is everyone is corrupt, so you cannot be trusted with money. So I think the second place for messaging is to really think about risk and what kind of risks are we willing to take for our future.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really,
so
some really good thoughts in that intersection of messaging, and you mentioned funding. And it really, I think too often what happens is the people that are most affected by climate change are the people that are often talked about, but not spoken to, let alone listened to. And I think another thing that resonated with me, and it's something that we practice in solutions journalism, is to also kind of look around you. Sometimes we gravitate as journalists to people with hefty titles, positions of power and influence. And of course, that is absolutely important, whether it's an elected official or someone in the science field. But we shouldn't miss an opportunity to also speak to the people who are being affected, but also the people that are working for those people with hefty titles and roles, because they're doing the work also, right? And they also have particular insights that definitely are valuable in order for us to weave into the storytelling. Tarun, I wanted to go with you and your thoughts about messaging in regards to co-benefits.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I'm a through and through capitalist. And I think it's really important that we leverage principles of capitalism and just use costs to drive climate action. So that's basically the way that I look at stuff. For us, it's everything that we do in Green Jams, the products that we develop, the kind of solutions that we introduce to the market directly have significant climate action. So, it's just inherently woven into our operations, which essentially just means that the more business that I get, the more of these products that I make, the higher the climate impact is going to be. So, definitely leverage co-benefits as the key message to all of our customers, partners, vendors, stakeholders. Each customer is different. Each customer has, different needs, which means that, the kind of messaging that we do for each category of customers is different. Like, for example, an asset owner who has a particular benchmark on the carbon footprint of their assets would be more interested in understanding the aspects of how much CO2 it is that you're capturing. Someone else would be more interested in. So we have a lot of rural school structures, village infrastructure sort of customers also. So for them, what matters more is, hey, I mean, how many tons of crop residues are you preventing from being burned? How much of that money is going to farmers? How much of those, how much of that money is essentially then coming back into the education system through the kids of these farmers? So yeah, I mean, messaging keeps evolving, but I think that the key thought that I want to present here is we leverage co-benefits significantly and use it in all of our messaging.
Thank you, Tarun. Anu, I want to kind of turn a little bit to another area topic that I know that your work is focused on, and that is in what ways can climate solutions address gender equity and empower women?
Thanks, Hugo. That's actually a very important question. I think a lot of climate work does now talk about bringing women in, talking about the burden, the climate burden, and the gender disparities. I think what's not happened is really getting down to the intersectionality of it. Not nearly enough. I think often what we see is you see small projects, specific amounts of funding, lots of care in these, and these end up being pilot projects. If you see large scale places where money is actually flowing in that's supposed to be climate adaptive, even climate mitigative, it's not happening to the extent that we need to. I mean, let's give you an example. So globally, we have, crop insurance schemes for farmers, huge big part of sort of food security that farmers get paid back, right? When there are extreme weather events. And there's so much innovation that's now happened from that sort of straightforward sort of insurance payout after a 20-day survey, by which time the waters would have receded and it's part paid out. Now we have parametric insurance. There's some fantastic innovation and happening in sort of what these indices are that kick in the moment a certain quantum of water is achieved, a certain heat level is achieved. So much work there. And yet, we've not sort of figured out, and you see this on the ground, and I'm seeing it here when insurance payouts happened, who are the land titles tied to? Mostly men. Who are the people who actually do a lot of the labor, right? It's the women. What's worse is often the large farmers get some of the money. The landless laborers, often women who are out there doing the work. When you have crop loss, they're losing income too, but they don't have access to any mechanisms to actually recover money. So net, it's not adaptive to the most climate vulnerable. So you have fantastic schemes for adaptation that don't always hit the mark when it comes to doing enough for women. But I'd like to sort of add that we are making the right noises, right? Even the Green Climate Fund, for a while now, asks for a gender plan. And there's now more and more scrutiny about what that gender plan needs to look like. So on paper, there is a lot more effort. But what those metrics are to measure what that impact is, and then on the ground, how do you make sure that it is intersectional? Because you will see large agriculturists, large informal workers, upper caste, who will, in the South Asian context, who will be able to capture a lot of the adaptation benefits. Intersectionally, the women of the lower caste, women of certain tribal groups don't get the same access. So really thinking about that kind of, so when you talk about co-benefits, it's not enough to just say that, yeah, you need economic, environmental benefits. You need to ask who benefits. That's very critical.
That's a great question. I like how you framed that, who benefits, because too often the decision makers are not reflective or inclusive of the people that are most impacted, right? And I mentioned that previously in reaction to another answer. But Gargi, another marginalized community that is often spoken about, not spoken to, are Indigenous people. How can Indigenous knowledge and traditional practices enhance the co-benefits of climate solutions?
Thank you. I'm actually going to take a bit longer answering this question because Anu made a very important point, and I think I might be able to add some things that might be interesting for your audience. So Anu is correct, 100%, that a lot of the climate impact very much map along the lines of race and caste and gender and class and geography and all of these things, which is also very visible in South Asia. Also, a lot of times communities experience layered and multi-dimensional impacts of climate inequities. Like one example that I'm thinking of is Indigenous women, especially, are silenced in spaces of, for example, agriculture policy or climate change policy and so forth. Very much going back to the previous point of why is messaging important? Because of the idea that's being perpetuated all the time is not of Indigenous women's brilliance, but their helplessness, and the helplessness which is a result of centuries of past and continuing subjugation and exploitation of their land. That is very important when we're talking about women and Indigenous peoples and individuals that happen to be both of them. And it was correct, women farmers do not often have land tenure rights, and they do not or cannot exercise control over the governance of territory. More than half of the world's food is produced by women. Sorry, women are half of the world's smallholder farmers. Over 70% of food in Africa is produced by women, yet women continue to have barely any land tenure rights. We also know that security of the land is very important in having stability in society and economic security, right? So one who has land has the negotiating power and the leverage to share their concerns. And one study has also found that women who own land are less vulnerable to domestic violence because just the fact that they have this piece of paper that gives them right to the land that they already work on really transforms the social experience that they have and the political experience that they have. So as we understand how important land is, we also understand that unequal access to land or unequal ownership of land also impacts the ability to decide what to do with that land, also known as autonomy or sovereignty or self-determination, which is what has been the experience of Indigenous communities for 400 years, maybe longer, even right now, today, at this very minute, yes. And when these communities are always having resources extracted from them and their lives being given no value under the dominant system, it is a responsibility of the rest of us to ensure that that doesn't happen. One of the ways that that is possible is addressing land inequality. It is addressing land tenures and land titles and land grabs as large multinational corporations supported by national governments and military, paramilitary forces, as they seize land from Indigenous peoples, they are also taking away their ability to be able to implement the solutions that they have. And this is despite the fact that we know that, and this is a very popular statistic, but Indigenous peoples are 5% of the world's population and they protect 80% of its biodiversity. And yet the legal systems and the political systems very much undermine Indigenous rights at the expense, they, for the sake of economic growth, foreign investment and so forth, depending on the context that you're in. And also funders, my core audience, also give a minuscule amount of money to projects that are led by Indigenous peoples. So, and this would be the last thing once I find where it is. Yes. Indigenous people receive 0.13% to 0.74% of all aid that is directed towards the climate crisis. Even when money goes to benefit Indigenous peoples, that doesn't mean that it is Indigenous peoples who have the access to the money or who are the ones in the decision-making position to be able to decide what kind of development project will happen. So yeah, I think as we're talking about co-benefits, we're talking about messaging, we're talking about all of us going back to the spheres that we are present in, including the journalists in this room. I think one of the things that I would really hope that we can be conscious of is, first of all, the climate crisis doesn't get a lot of attention within it. Indigenous peoples barely get attention. If they do, it is more platitudes than actual respect for wisdom and experience. Even when there is money set aside for Indigenous-led climate action, it's not necessarily the money that is spent by Indigenous peoples. It's often to benefit, which basically means we organized a workshop where Indigenous peoples attended. So I think we need to keep coming back to the idea of who is a climate expert in the world that we live in and whose climate expertise are we uplifting. Thank you.
Well,
For
look, I think you've unpacked so much there. You mentioned indigenous people and just that percentage that you talked about, how small they are, but the percentage of what they're responsible for. And then you also very well talked about the other side of capitalism, right? Because capitalism is a double-edged sword. And as someone who lives in the United States, plenty of examples of how through capitalism, the wealth that's being created is not necessarily going to the people who need it the most. And then, of course, the wealth that's being created is on the backs of the most vulnerable people. But one of the things that stuck with me was self-determination. And Tarun, I wanted to talk to you about how climate mitigation solutions also contribute to climate resilience and adaptation. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's quite complex as a topic, but I can tell you a little bit about how we are driving climate mitigation and also then enabling climate resilience and adaptation. So one of the key aspects about what we do with Agrofeed is that because we use crop residues, the one thing that we're actually able to do is reduce the air pollution in these indigenous communities, which is where the most number of casualties occur because of this problem of crop residue burning. So one, we're able to eliminate that. Second, the more buildings that get made with Agrofeed essentially are a lot more thermally insulating, which means that with warming climates and basically with the warming temperatures, your energy expenditure associated with heating and cooling reduces, because of which your buildings, the houses that you live in, basically become a lot more climate resilient. And I think what's important to consider here is design. I come from the materials side of things, which basically means that when you try and fix the design principles with which you make your materials, where you bring in aspects of circular economy. CoBenefits, it's really essential. It's central to the sort of design that you do for any sort of modern materials, newer materials that you develop. So that's just one example of how we're doing with Agrofeed. I think there are plenty more examples here. But it is definitely important to start thinking about whole systems, life cycles, understand each stage, each aspect. I think that's one message that I have for any designers in the audience or any engineers in the audience, where you need to consider about these aspects before you start introducing newer solutions to the market, or at least ask these questions. So whoever is making these materials is compelled to think about the way that they make their materials, to start thinking about the way that they make the materials.
Thank you. And we're about circling 20 minutes left of this discussion. We will soon get to the questions from our attendees, so get your questions ready. I've already got one lined up from Ibrahim Afidi. But one last question before we get to that portion of today's conversation. Anu, you've mentioned this already, but I wanted to see if we can dig in a little bit deeper. How can climate finance mechanisms be designed to ensure that the co-benefits of climate solution are equitably distributed across different socioeconomic groups? You did a wonderful job to talk about, that particular aspect when it comes to unrepresented communities like women. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that, and how we can be much more methodical, strategic in regards to these finance mechanisms?
Yeah, I think, I to speak to what Tarun and Gagi was saying, and what you sort of mentioned, Hugo, as well. I think you design the finance mechanisms by speaking to communities who are sort of going to be at the receiving end. And I say receiving end because I don't want to use the word beneficiaries. This trustee beneficiary relationship, as Gagi mentioned, is problematic. You need people on the ground helping you design sort of what the sort of what kind of finance they want, in what ways they want it, and what works. Having said that, So a lot of, and again, I speak to a lot of the adaptation work that's happening globally, right? A lot of the money that comes in through projects, through multilateral development funds, through bilateral development funds, even through corporate social responsibility projects by the private sector, or blended finance, as we love to hear, which is sort of, the public sector trying to take some sort of risk and help sort of the private sector put in money. These come one time. They come, they do a bit of work, there's some impact analysis, it goes away, but climate adaptation resilience is a continuum. We need to tap in to see how finance mechanisms that are pervasive, access to local credit from their local banks, from, sort of local government schemes, direct benefit transfers, the money that, sort of people, women have access to as a regular stream of sort of finance. This is what we need to see in terms of how can this be made more resilient? Where are the co-benefits in trying to pitch climate there? And I mean, I can already tell you, there's some fantastic studies about whether microfinance, for instance, is actually climate adaptive. And the short answer is very, very uneven outcomes. It helps with short-term shocks. So it helps in coping, but it's not adaptive in the long run because it leaves women in cycles of debt. And often what that ends up doing is that they're borrowing from the informal lender, which was the whole point of getting microfinance to begin with, to pay off that debt. And it is very disciplinary in terms of how women are sort of schooled into having to have this discipline to pay back. So these are sort of access to finance that they have. There are other government schemes in some countries that are working because the government runs them at better rates. But having said that, often when we speak to women and others who are doing work in the community as well, they're not just looking for finance to come as part of a grant, as part of a project. Often we hear agriculturalists, men, women say, we need better streams of income. Let's earn our money. And that will make us adaptive, right? And so thinking about what are the sort of those streams of income that can come in. So again, reframing the co-benefits conversation when it comes to thinking about what that finance is, how it can be adaptive, and who gets to decide, where these finance streams sort of will impact.
Yeah, well, you said it, Gargi said it, Tarun has said it. I think as a journalist, absolutely following the money is very important. It's very important in being very transparent about where the funding's coming from and where it's going to. I think a lot of times as a journalist, there's a fantastic stories that I read about responses to these social problems, both at the micro level and macro level, but not enough about funding and specifically, as you've mentioned and others, where it's coming from and where it's going to. I want to get to now questions from our guests and a wealth of information that's really being shared on the chat. So I invite you, if you haven't already, to check that out. There's a lot of different links that I see that is being shared by Terra, by Solutions Journalism, by our guests. Here's a question that from Ibrahim, and I'd like for you, Gargi, to answer first. What policies exist to curb military environmental impact? How do their operations fuel the climate crisis? And what's stopping governments from being held accountable locally and globally?
Sorry, I was muted. Oh, that is such an important question. I have to be very careful in how I answer it. But I don't think how we can have a future with climate co-benefits and so forth where there is violence and there is conflict and there are disproportionate uses of power. I also cannot imagine a future where climate co-benefits can exist that also has massive emitting weapons, right? Not just the fact that armies occupying or otherwise exist, but also the fact, so that is to the root causes, but also that they have such large emissions. I shared a few links that give a bit of a sense of how the US military in particular is one of the largest polluters on the planet, right? Very not only are they depriving millions, hundreds of millions of liberty, they are also depriving everyone else of peace and clean air and of a 1.5 degree Celsius future. So that's a bit about how the operations fuel the climate crisis, right? I also shared one link from ages ago. It's from The Guardian, but showing how Shell, working together with Nigerian paramilitary forces, would quell protests, would kill protesters, right? So the same movements and frontline communities and all the people that we're talking about who are trying to ensure a just, fair, equitable future and such, militaries are the ones who are killing them. Being an environmental rights defender, earth defender, etc., is one of the deadliest jobs or professions or callings on the planet right now. What policies exist to curb the environmental impact? I'm really not sure. I don't know the answer to that, so I'd be curious from others. And what is stopping governments from being held accountable locally and globally? So, I'm going to share a link to an excerpt from a report we published last year that really gets into the root causes of the climate crisis, talks about how, you know, we can't just like do band-aids to like whatever symptoms of the climate crisis, like, oh, there's a flood, we need to take care of the flood, but also like, oh, we're heating up the planet so much, that's why there's a flood, so we need to address the heating. And I think that might be able to help you with the answer on what might be a problem with accountability. Although a lawyerly answer I can give is very much depends on the legal system, right? So India, where I first trained as a lawyer, it can be a bit hard to hold the government, state parties, whatever, accountable if you don't have a corresponding law, right? Other jurisdictions that I know of, sometimes it's easier to hold them accountable using administrative law and not really environmental law. And the third, the country where I live, the Netherlands, we have a monist legal structure. So that means that whatever treaties, etc., the Netherlands enters into internationally, they automatically become domestic law. And so you can force the government to, well, you can try to hold the government accountable under those international agreements that it has signed, which is why you have seen a few prominent environmental cases coming out of the Netherlands that would not be possible in other jurisdictions. So that was my answer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And before I move on, I just want to make sure, Seth, with the time that we have, I don't see any other questions. Are there any other questions? Can I move on to other questions we have for our guests? Just want to be mindful of attendees.
Please go on, Hugo. I haven't noticed any others come through too. And if you do have any questions, please be welcome to add them to the chat. But I know we're going very broad and diverse in sort of all the different topics we're covering. I think that's the nuance of this co-benefits topic. So yeah, please just continue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Tarun, I want to go back to you. Are there any trade-offs between emphasizing climate solutions versus emphasizing other co-benefits of climate solutions and not putting emphasis on the climate impact? How do you navigate those?
Yeah. Again, I mean, the bulk of this, all the customers that we deal with, all the sort of stakeholders that we essentially talk to don't care as much about climate impact. So a lot of times, I mean, at least this part of the world, right? You have much bigger problems to solve. Access to finance, just livelihoods. There are much larger problems to tackle. So which is why, anytime that I talk about climate impact and the sort of, benefits, essentially the primary benefits of the solutions that we have, it generally starts giving off the sort of impression that, these guys start building about the product, the company and everything is, bunch of do-gooders just trying to sell stuff that, that these guys find extremely difficult to relate to. Which is why in the geographies that we work in, it makes a lot of sense for us to actually put a lot of focus on co-benefits than the primary climate benefits. That is one experience that, that we've been facing.
Thank you. And this next question is a little bit sort of for my benefit and other journalists in the room. And I really want to hear from all of you, beginning with you, Anu. How can reporters better integrate talking about climate co-benefits in their reporting?
Yeah, I think one of the most positive things about a co-benefits framing is that first and foremost, it acknowledges that climate change is multidimensional. It's a threat multiplier, and it exacerbates existing inequalities, existing development, and sort of other economic gaps, but also deteriorating ecologies. And so solutions need to try and tackle all of this. So I think for reporters to understand the multidimensionality of it, one, when you're looking for sort of looking at stories around climate change, whether they're policies or case studies or communities, thinking about what that multidimensionality is. But also, I think a lot of climate solutions, because we're talking about solutions here, it's important to look at, and I love Kate Raworth for this, think about your planetary boundaries, right? We're looking at deprivation, inequality, degradation. What are your planetary boundaries? Let's not just think about, is this adaptive? Is this sort of reducing emissions of X, Y, and Z? What are these other planetary boundaries we're not meeting when we're thinking about specific solutions? So are they ticking off some of these? And the third, I think, for me, like I said, be cognizant of the politics behind any conversation around, sort of climate solutions. Who benefits? I mean, I love Rebecca Elliott's work, and I'll post some of her work here. She uses the word values at risk, because we all, if you have a finance background, you know what the bar value is, right? It's that big risk value you need to get to clean up the risk, climate risk in your portfolio if you're a company. But actually, different people experience and understand risks differently. So understanding that there's politics involved and there's always someone who benefit more than the other. So yeah, looking at all of these three dimensions for sort of reporters.
Thank you, Anu. That's valuable advice. And I think for those in the room, it bears repeating or unfolding solutions journalism, right? When people hear solutions journalism, there's an emphasis on solutions, and too often people think we're talking about a story that is solving a problem. Not necessarily. Solutions journalism focuses on the response to social problems, and it really investigates those responses. It looks at the evidence of those responses, the insights of those responses, and limitations, because it's absolutely beneficial to tell a story about a response that's working, but equally why it's falling short. There are a lot of lessons learned from responses that don't meet the mark. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about today and what you've shared is paramount in helping journalists like myself tell those stories. Gargi, any advice for journalists, for a person like me that's looking to do better in this space?
That's a tall order, but yeah, I think you touched on a very important point at the end, which was thinking about, success, failure, etc., and what does that really mean? And in our conversations with funders, we continuously ask them to redefine, like, not just be stuck to like this very narrow notion of what success is. So, for example, I think about quite some 5-10 years ago when the first bit of anti-pipeline protests began in North America. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, for this generation, this was like the defining environmental issue, right? And it was on the news all the time, and regardless of the outcome, all of that movement was successful in the fact that there was this whole new generation of people who saw what was happening on the news and they were energized and they became part of the climate movement, right? It's the same thing with like the Fridays for Future stuff in recent years, where it has been, on journalists to really make that story relatable so that it is inspiring to others. But I think apart from the co-benefits, one of the things that I would love to see more of, especially as we talk about slow journalism and such, is to talk about things on a more longer time scale, right? So for example, one of our member organizations had been funding groups in Nigeria since 2005 as they were resisting shell. And they were funded for 17 years before the court in The Hague in the Netherlands held Shell responsible, right? And if we're coming from this very short-term idea of like, well, I just put in the money, so where are the results? Or, okay, you just started the organization, so you need to have something to show for it, like 6 months later. That is not how things work, right? This is why we talk about root causes, like, okay, if setting up this extractive system took so long, it is going to take a while to dismantle it as well. And so thinking about things on a longer time scale is something that I would love to see more of. And also one thing I've been loving from SJN, from so many other spaces, is not getting in the way of the communities as they speak for themselves. I'm seeing this more in environmental journalism and also in tech journalism, seeing more bylines by journalists from the community where they're reporting, right? So we're also moving away from this idea of like objectivity, subjectivity, or whatever, and you cannot report on what is happening locally. A white Westerner has to come in and lend their objective eyes to it. So yeah, just some things to mull over. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. No, and I agree with you. When we talk about climate solutions journalism, it's really a marathon, not a sprint. I think a lot of times news outlets have a very short attention span. It's like this full court press on one particular moment. And there's a lot of great coverage, a lot of attention, and then it goes away because there's another shiny object that appears. We've got 60 seconds, Tarun, and I want to end with you. What advice do you have for journalists before we say goodbye?
Hey man, I don't think there's anything else that I can add to what Anu and Gargi just mentioned. I think great points. I concur.
Tarun with the layup. Seth, back to you. Thank you everyone for your great insights, all of our guests. Again, thank you for this invitation to participate as moderator. Seth, back to you, as they say.
No, thank you so much, Hugo. Yeah, first of all, thank you again to all of our panelists for sharing your wisdom and knowledge and advice as well. I think it's been really great to hear. And Hugo, thank you for kind of guiding our conversation. I think I always knew that this conversation was going to be a challenging one, not due to just due to the breadth of what we can talk about, right? And it's been, and especially with the diversity of experiences of the group here and the kind of different parts of the ecosystem of climate solutions that you all and adaptation that you all work on. It's a lot to bring together, but I hope it's been very expansive for the folks who've listened to this about and to get different ideas of what are different lenses and approaches that we can be talking about. Tarun, thank you, and Anu, thank you for being up late with us. I know it's late in the evening for you all, and for Anu calling from in the field. I think it's a great representation of what we're trying to talk about in terms of actually bringing the stories in the community to a more global audience as well. There are 2 other sessions that we ran in the last 2 weeks. So for those of you who are interested in learning more, you can go check out the recordings. We have fact sheets as well around these topics too. So if this is interesting, you want to wrap your head around it more, we'll also be putting together a post-session report that will also add to the Terra and SJN webpage around this event, which we'll share with you in the when we send you an email afterwards. So with all of that, I'm seeing a lot of gratitude coming in from the chat as well. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, however long that may be, and hopefully we'll see you around soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care.